Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the new Darkness Ablaze stuff, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, we are going to be looking at one of the most talked about V cards from the new Darkness Ablaze set. I think there's a lot of hype around this guy. It's going to be Vikavolt V. So let's first of all talk about the card in general, why people are going so crazy over this card. It's a 210 hit point lightning type Pokemon, obviously a V Pokemon, so 2 prize cards given up when it's knocked out. It has the paralyzing bolt attack, and this is what's got a lot of people talking. For a lightning and 1 colorless energy, you do 50 damage and your opponent can't play item cards from their hand during their next turn. A lot of people straight away think that this is going to be the new Seismitoad, and that has also been backed up by some Japanese tournaments as well, where this card has come out on top. We'll be looking at that list in just a moment. So yeah, a lot of people are expecting this to do very, very well in our Darkness Ablaze meta. It also has that second attack Super Zap Cannon. For 2 lightning and 1 colorless, you do 190 damage. You discard 2 energy from this Pokemon. More of a finishing move than something that you'll use throughout the game. I think the general strategy for this sort of archetype will be remain locking your opponent for as long as possible. Stop them being able to use their Bull Search cards, their switching cards, all of those sorts of things that really help people keep ticking over. And just making life very awkward for them as you're not doing a huge amount of damage as you go, but hopefully you're just making your opponent draw suboptimally throughout the entire time, sometimes shutting off, even a third or more of your opponent's deck from valid cards that they have available. So that's really the main strategy that we've got going on here. It has a chunky 3 retreat cost, and it also has a weakness to fighting, and we'll start talking about how we can tackle those issues as we go. First of all, let's have a look at the Japanese National 2020 online tournament. I think there's about 200 or so players that entered this tournament, and the finals was 2 Vikavolt V deck lists, and this is the one that actually ended up winning the entire event. You can see that it is very much a Vikavolt list. This isn't just a tech card going in lightning style decks. This is Vikavolt is the best attacker. Let's start spamming that paralyzing bolt over and over again and making life difficult for our opponents. That is literally the build here. You can see it's just got a small Jirachi package trying to back things up. You can see it's got a tag call engine here, mostly focusing on Guzma and Hala. That is because, of course, you can grab Speed, Lightning Energy, Thunder Mountain, as well as some of your switching outs with the escape boards if need be. You can see Jirachi's in this package, or you could grab things like the Counter Gain or the Toughness Cape as well. Some very nice tools that you can use off of the Guzma Hala. I think that is really the focal point of this 60, just saying that Guzma Hala basically always guarantees you that paralyzing bolt, so that's why you're seeing so much of it in this list. Absol definitely does lean into the 3 bosses orders that you've got going on in this list as well, trying to trap things, and when you're increasing the retreat cost of Pokemon via that Absol, and locking out your opponent, you're shutting off all their switches, all their scoop up nets, all their air balloons and stuff like that, so they just can't move out of the active until they're like manually attaching their way to retreat. So really having that Absol in there alongside the high boss count will certainly be a great way that you can sort of steal some easy prizes from opponents, which is pretty cool. Coco Prism Star alongside the Thunder Mountain is great acceleration. You can see it's playing a Marshadow. That's mostly so that you're stopping Celtic Swell from being a headache for you, I would imagine. It's got Oricorio GX, not something that we see a lot of, especially in multiple prize decks, but it can be a way of getting yourself a few extra cards here and there. The Dene just for early turn 1-outs, and also got an Alolan Raichu and Raichu GX. Similar to, like I was saying, with the 190 damage from the Super Zap Cannon from the Vikavolt, you could alternatively start attaching to a Raichu in the back, and go for either paralysis plays with the tandem shock or build up towards that big GX attack. Seeing as though Vikavolt doesn't really require much energy throughout the game, it's just a 2 energy attacker, sometimes even less with the Thunder Mountain in play, so that can give you a lot of freedom to attach to other attackers throughout the game, and having Raichu as a higher damage output kind of card definitely makes a lot of sense in this list. Other than the tag call stuff, it's got those quick balls, it's got Electro Power, obviously a key focal point pre-rotation. Also playing Giant Bomb as well, I think another way that you can get extra damage in play. Obviously if your opponent's hitting into you for a good chunk of damage, you're then putting a chunk straight back onto them, so you can possibly finish them off with the likes of Raichu or with Vikavolt, which is very cool. And other than that, it's all very straightforward. You've got those stamps for disruption as well. Obviously, your opponent has a ton of more dead cards in their deck if they've not been able to play items the entire time, so those will be extremely disruptive. But other than that, the core concept is just start swinging with Vikavolt and make life awkward for your opponent. Let's start talking about the things that we're going to have to try and overcome post-rotation. The biggest one by far is Electro Power. Your damage output is way, way worse with this deck, now that you don't have the extra 120 damage that you would get from playing those Electro Powers. And obviously, these also combined with those Giant Bombs quite nicely. You can see that the deck didn't really need to play much disruption on its own end, just to get over the line with damage in general. Thanks to these Z-powers. So I think the Giant Bombs actually end up becoming a lot worse as well, because you don't have the combination of Electro Power plus Giant Bomb. So although I have seen a lot of lists that will continue to play bombs, I think they are substantially worse when you don't have E-Power. E-Power has also just helped you push with that Vikavolt and become much more disruptive. For example, you can knock out Jirachis in one hit. And you can just put more damage on like any evolving Pokemon as well, so you could really be a lot more threatening out the gate, as well as just stacking these E-powers for big, you know, Raichu attack turns or something like that to close out the game very quickly. So those are all things to be aware of. The E-Power was a fundamental part of the Japanese lists and the pre-rotation lists, and part of the reason why Vikavolt is so threatening. There's also a small dip in consistency when we can't lean into that tag call package quite as much as we could, because Thunder Mountain is of course a Lost Thunder card, and that's going to rotation. Also, the Guzhala could grant you access to escape boards or even air balloons if you wanted to be able to get out of the active for a Vikavolt to come in. So I think the tag call package in general gets a lot weaker here. Obviously, you still can search out like Raichu, Guzmahala is still decent for getting you speed lightning energies and stuff like air balloon post rotation, but it is far, far worse than it would be to grab Mountain and just get swinging. So that's something to bear in mind. Obviously, Sinlin could be still decent for getting back like Boss's Orders and a few other disruption supporters even. And there's also the option for Malolana. So I don't think there's going to be zero tag call packages of Vikavolt going forward, but I do think it's way, way worse than we have seen it previously. Another note, just still talking about the tag call stuff, was Belelba and Bryson Man has, of course, been banned. It's no longer a usable card. And that was also one of the key defenses against Eternatus. And pre-rotation Eternatus may not be the best deck in the format, but post-rotation it seems to be way more powerful, I think. I believe it'll be around tier 1 post-rotation for certain, so that's just my opinion. But Belelba was a great defense that Vikavolt had to make life awkward for Eternatus, and that's sort of taken away from us post-rotation thanks to the new ban list. So here is going to be a skeleton list of the Vikavolt. I decided to go for a skeleton because I've tried a few different variations of Vikavolt, and I'm not necessarily like 100% pleased with any of my actual 60 card lists. And at the same time, you can see that we have 19 spaces here once you just cut away from basically the cards that have rotated from the Japanese 60, and then just making the concession that the tag call package isn't mandatory anymore. I've kind of made those changes and said, you know what, this is the absolute core. I think almost every Vikavolt list will play all of these cards that are in front of you right now. I think the exception might be Jirachi. Not every Vikavolt list will be Jirachi based. I still think Jirachi is actually pretty important, especially because we don't have Thunder Mountain anymore. It means it's much more important to have something that isn't a Vikavolt in the active position, because you want your Koko Prism Star to be the activator to get that turn 1 attack with Vikavolt V so much more often. Now that said, if you are playing a Turbo Patch build, it's less important for you to not start a Vikavolt, if that makes sense. It's actually more beneficial for you to start Vikavolt if you are playing Turbo Patches in addition to Koko Prism Star. So, although this is a skeleton list, I wouldn't expect 100% of Vikavolts going forward to play Jirachi. I'm just still personally like a big fan of Jirachi, so that's why they're in my list, and it's going to make up the 41 card skeleton going on here. And the rest of the video is going to be talking about how we can fill up the remaining spaces of this list. You can see that Professor's research wasn't in the Japanese 60 at all, actually. It was just playing a bunch of Marnies and Erica, and also played one copy of Birdkeeper. But with the tag call stuff going, and again leaning more towards the Koko Prism and even Turbo Patch, in the list going forward for Vikavolt, it's going to be more important to have discard draw, so you can put lightning energies into the discard pile, because they are going to be the activators for both Coco and those patches. So I do think that research will be a highly played supporter in Vikavolt going forward. So this is my like bare bones list that I've used as a base for all of the other lists that I've tried to like flesh out, I guess you could say. So how are we going to fill the remaining 19 slots? What made the Japanese list so much stronger than the post-rotation build, and how we can try and cover up those weaknesses or try and make amends for the losses of the Thunder Mountain, how we can make amends for the loss of Electro Power. Those are going to be the real thought-provoking things we have to try and come up with to still remain, you know, a top contender in the format. So first of all, the obvious one, we lose Thunder Mountain. How can we add more consistency to the turn 1 item lock? How can we make up for those Electro Powers going? How can we make sure that the damage output is still sufficient? Can we add in more disruption? If we can't deal more damage, can we just buy ourselves more turns in general so that we can announce more attacks and get over the line that way? And also, are there going to be any matchups that we are finding awkward post-rotation that we need to tech for in particular? Let's start off with the easy one, adding consistency to your first turn. For the skeleton list, there was just one copy of Dedenne GX. If you want to add in a second copy or even Crobat Vs just for additional draw outs in those opening turns, that's never going to be an issue for you. I think Turbo Patch is most people's go-to because it means that you're allowed to prize Coco Prism Star for one thing, and also it just gives you way more outs to grab that. Obviously, this is coin flip based, but it can just be a very simple way of you being able to Vikavolt immediately, and also means that if your Vikavolts are knocked out in one hit, you can, you know, still get your next one powered up all in one turn. So I would assume a decent amount of Vikavolts going forward will be using Turbo Patch. I was very close to putting it as part of the skeleton list, to be honest. But I do think there'll be some lists that don't play necessarily 4 copies. There'll be some that play like 2 copies and stuff like that. And it felt really weird putting a 2 count of Turbo Patch on the skeleton 60 because I believe most will go to a higher count, but not all of them. Some people can lean more towards that just Coco Prism build and hope that that's enough energy acceleration to maintain your Vikavolts. But personally, I think the patches are more or less going to be played in the majority of Vikavolt lists. I think if you want to make your Coco and your patches as live as possible, Viridian Forest becomes a very, very nice stadium card that you can be playing. The only real headache of Viridian Forest in your own 60 is that if you are trying to include energy denial cards like Crushing Hammers and that sort of stuff, giving your opponent Viridian means they can continually find the energy to attach for turn like that very same turn. So you remove an energy on the heads of a Crushing Hammer, they can immediately go ahead and replace that with Viridian, even if you are hitting them with things like Marnie and trying to item lock them at the same time. It's going to be still pretty routine for them to find their next energy attachment and keep up with tempo in that regard. So if you are playing energy disruption, I think Viridian isn't ideal, but even if you are just going down this route, you just want to bump up your energy count. I said 6 was the sort of low number for energy cards for basic lightnings in addition to your speed lightnings. The Japanese 60 only played 5 copies, but I could see the basic lightning list going up to, you know, 7, 8 copies of basic lightning, just so that you can Dedenne them away, research them away on those opening turns, so you can make the patches and the Coco as live as possible, similar to how we've seen Pikarom really play a very high count of both speed lightning and basic lightning for those very same reasons. Capture Energy could be a decent card. It gives you extra search for that Coco straight away, and you do have a 1 colorless attack cost in your Vikavolt. I don't think you'll play many of these, maybe just like an extra 1 copy in your list. Same for Pokemon Communication. I think this is really just extra outs to you finding your Coco early on. Only playing 4 Quick Ball and Tag Calls, only being able to find Raichu if you are still playing a Tag Call engine may not be sufficient, because you need to get yourself the Vikavolt turn 1 as well as Coco a lot of the time. So having a couple comms in here, giving you better access to not only the Vikavolt as a main attacker, not only the Coco, but also just like, if it's time to start digging, you can grab Crobat or Dedenne at the same time. So I can foresee, you know, like 2 or 3 comms sneaking into these 60s at the same time. And more switching outs in general. To the 4 switch I put on the skeleton list, especially if you are playing Jirachi, you might want to have more outs to move your guys out of the way so you can get straight into that Vikavolt. I've seen a few other different like leads as well for this deck. For the Vikavolts, like you might want to play Galarian Slowbro, for example, just to put poison on things, and you may want to have extra switch outs there. Not necessarily Scoop Up Net or Air Balloon. You might want to try even things like the Dark City Stadium, for example, to move your Slowbro out of the way. But I was just using the Net and the Balloon as a more so like standard example of moving your guys out the way. Scoop Up Net obviously has extra synergy for other Pokemon as well that you could be playing, like Giratina for removal of special energy cards. You could play Mewtwo for recovering supporter cards, stuff like that, not just moving your Jirachis in general. Next up, let's talk about increasing your damage output. These are all the ones that are just straight up trying to deal more damage. Incineroar means that your item lock is now doing 80 damage, which is a lot more, to be fair. And it can help start pushing on those V Pokemon that little bit easier, so you're just three-shotting a lot of basic V Pokemon. It's certainly a lot more pressure, and it's similar for the VMAX Pokemon. You're, again, just putting more pressure on in general. And it makes your little 190 attack a lot more dangerous as well as a finishing move on a lot of V Pokemon at the same time. So this Incineroar, yes, it's a stage 2. No, it hasn't seen any play previously, but we really are desperate for dealing more damage, and this could be a way of just having like a, 2-1-2 line of Incineroar, or even just like a 2-2-2 line of Incineroar and no rare candies whatsoever, and just slowly evolving into him to give yourself more options for damage output. Vitality Band, I think, probably just isn't enough of a damage mod to be worth it, unless we have specifically a number of 60 hit point Pokemon in the format. Giant Bomb was in the Japanese 60, and like I say, I think it's a lot worse when you don't have Electro Powers to sort of supplement it, because you're still not really pushing on many VMAX Pokemon, even after they take that 100 damage, because they'll still have 280 remaining, and like even Choo-Choo can't really finish things off anymore. Which was previously something like you could sometimes do. So I do think that could be somewhat of an issue. So finding a new tool for this deck might be important. I've tried having a Flapple base build, trying to be similar to Toadbats of old, and that's kind of the intention of the Zigzagoon line as well as the Flapple Turfield combo you could try and get going. Obviously Toadbats was like a pretty successful archetype in its time. And, we have those options in the format as well. So if you want to try and get creative with these guys as well, you certainly could do that to be a way of offsetting this low base output. Disruption is really what I've seen more people go down for the most part. I think just accepting that the damage output is pretty poor and just trying to buy more turns overall is going to be beneficial. Obviously, you have Energy Denial in the format, Crushing Hammers, as well as Wondrous Labyrinth, especially because you're shutting off things like Metal Saucers and Turbo Patches from the opponent. Means that you can take full advantage of them. Trying to stick that Wonder Labyrinth could be really annoying. Like I said, if you are playing Scoop Up Net, it makes the Dimension Breach Giratina a much stronger option. Team Yellgrunt simply trying to like buy you a turn and crossing your fingers, even though they are just going to reattach that energy the following turn, could also be an option for you. If you also want to have damage buff on top of that, you could try adding in some Arctozolts in the background. I've seen a few people do this, and yes, it's a really ugly fossil to try and put down, but it can be a way that you can actually make life awkward for the opponent, especially on, like heads flips of Crushing Hammers and stuff. They have to start debating whether they just sacrifice whatever's sat in the active because they think it's going to take too much damage just by, the virtue of a bunch of Yellgrunts coming down turn by turn, or they just start attaching to the bench instead. And that can be quite a fun sort of headache for the opponent at times as well. I've seen Cheer Yellhorn in a few lists as well. Again, I think if you're playing a Jirachi combo or some other Pokemon, like even Galarian Slowbro, if they just sit in the active, they can be the ones that get the confusion on your side, whilst you're also confusing the opponent and just forcing them into coin flips whenever they are trying to hit your Vikavolts. That can be quite interesting. Galamine for extra disruption in terms of making your boss's orders that much stronger. Means that Dedennes and Crobats are basically never going to be able to pay retreat, even over, like a decent number of turns, especially with Absol in addition to these Galamines. So that could certainly be a headache for the opponent. And then there's status conditions. Obviously, Toxicroak can be something that can stack poison up and up and up if you really want to get creative. But at the same time, just having regular 10 extra between turns can be pretty decent from the likes of Slowbro V. Koga's Trap doing the combination of poison and confusion, similar to what that Cheer Yellhorn Slowbro combo is trying to do, could also be something that we go down. Even if the Koga's Trap is just like a 1 count, if again you are playing that tag call package, Sinlin back the Koga's Trap as an option. Could be a Hail Mary that you can do, especially combining it with reset stamps and alike. That could be a real problem. Also, there's the Slumbering package that we can also combine with Fungus Amoongus. Bursting spores, sending the opponent to sleep and poisoning them at the same time. Again, bit of extra chip damage from the poison, but more so just trying to make your opponent flip a bunch of coins to attack in the first place. And when they don't have switches or scoop up nets or anything accessible to them, thanks to the item lock, sleep becomes a lot more annoying. We've seen how strong Slumbering Forest has been alongside Mareep in the mill decks in the past, so I actually am quite interested in this Amoongus Slumbering combo with Vikavolt overall. I think it could be very interesting, especially because you can manipulate poison so that things get knocked out like going into your turn, so you can start the lock again on new things. I think that's the most appealing thing about the poison stuff overall compared to just raw damage mods. Same thing for the Flapple and the Obstagoon, really. If you can use these at the right times to take KOs on things mid-turn, or as it comes back into your turn, you can try and re-establish a lock, especially these status locks, on new Pokemon at the same time. So that could be really beneficial for you as well. Then there's finally just other matchups that you may want to be a little bit worried about, or just have a few answers for in addition to the stuff that you're playing just naturally. Toughness Cape and Malolana can be great options. Obviously, Malolana is a good mirror tech card, especially if they are playing status stuff and you're undoing a lot of damage from them, which is very cool. Toughness Cape can be a great card just to keep yourself out of range of a bunch of things, like Luke Metal Zacian, for example. Unfortunately, after the ADP buff, Zacian does still knock out a Vikavolt, so that could be a headache for you, but at least Luke Metal builds of Zacian you can stay out of range of. And it's just forcing more answers from like Eternatus players and stuff like that. So that could also be an extra addition to the list. I think possibly just a 1 or 2 count of Toughness Cape could be reasonable in here. Mimikyu could be added if you're experiencing a lot of people adding Malolanas into their own 60s. Yes, they can still do the switch effect, but at least they're not able to undo, you know, like 2 or 3 turns of your damage from their Vikavolt in the first place. So Mimikyu could be a nice tech include for you for sure. Weakness Guard Energy if you're fearful of the likes of Phalanx or Sandaconda or Stone Journer going forward. Obviously, you have that 1 colorless attack cost, so I don't think I'd play a lot of Weak Guard Energies, but possibly just 1 or 2. Maybe even just adding those giant bombs in addition to the Weakness Guard could help out in matchups where you do have weakness. Chaotic Swell can be very annoying, especially for the Welder decks. I think a lot of people experience the Center Scorch as quite a difficult matchup for Vikavolt because they are so low maintenance in their own right. If they just go for, you know, their Flare starter and they just start swinging with the Center Scorch, it's going to get very rough for you very quickly. And even things like, you know, your usual plays of Energy Disruption just aren't going to work against the Center Scorch. It's really just hoping that status conditions stick against them. And even then, they have so much hit points, it's going to get pretty rough for you. So possibly being proactive with Chaotic Swells and making it so that they can't pop off with Welder quite as quickly. Obviously needing those Giant Hearths now that we don't have Flints anymore. That could be very awkward for them. Also, if you are worried about Decidueye as an archetype, obviously you are disruptive in those early turns, make it hard for them to rare candy in the first place, but not quite as optimal as it would have been had we kept E-Powers. We can't just churn through the Rowlets as easily anymore, so that could be a little bit awkward. So having the likes of Electros or Zapdos joining in the list could give yourself a bit more stopping power against Quad Decidueye based builds. Overall, I do think that we've seen so much success from Seismitoad in the past, and the fact that this is the most similar to any Toad-based thing that we've had in the past. Like, we've had a ton of Stage 1-based item locking cards. We've had some like Behemoth and stuff like that that resets itself, that has slightly higher damage output, but still didn't see a huge amount of success, even with walls. This is the one that is most similar to Seismitoad in my eyes. And that's not only just in like how it feels and how it plays, it's also going to be how much space it has in the 60. And I think that's the real reason why I'm expecting Vikavolt to actually be relatively successful, even though it won't be as good as it was pre-rotation for certain. It still has those 19 deck slots to make up for that poor damage output, either by adding in disruption cards or adding in extra damage mods in the first place. Just because it's so easy to maintain these Vikavolts, it's just, you know, you're turn attaching throughout. Speed Lightnings give you extra draw on top of everything else, and you have the time to use Boss's Orders, Koga's Traps, Yell Grunts, because you're not really doing much for the turn. You're just wanting to attach to your next Vikavolt, re-announce your attack. So you've got so many options to get creative with your support accounts. Final note on this, I've also tried a list that's had extra draw power in the back, either like Pidgeotto or Cinccino's, so that you are just like pal padding a bunch of Yell Grunts, a bunch of bosses back into your deck and trying to use Disruption supporters like every single turn of the game. It does take up a lot of space, and it's not the easiest to build, but it could end up being similar to things like Zoroark Control of the past, where you can get low enough in your deck size where you're just pal padding back supporters, reusing them for turn, and your opponent's unable to play the game, so that 50 a turn is just like enough to see yourself over the line. Let me know what you guys think about the Vikavolt discussion, which has been your favorite way to play it. I haven't done a 60 card list today, just the skeleton and those suggestions so far, but I think for me it's mostly a mix and match. Like I said, I'm pretty much a big fan of the turbo patches. I'm more of a fan of the status condition stuff than I am of pure damage increasing from that first slide, and trying to weave in some of those tech cards, being conscious of what will be played against Vikavolt is going to be important as well. So let me know how you've experienced this archetype going forward. What have you found to be the most awkward matchup so far? Will it be a contender at all in the post-rotation meta, or will it be yet another item lock flop deck where people have jumped straight on the Toad hype train and it's not worked out? I'll hear all your thoughts down below. Thanks so much for watching, guys. It has been Joe from OmniPoke, and I will see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.